I guess I'm going to maybe go into how I make my sourdough English muffins. It has been requested a few times. So let me get my implements of destruction out and I'll take you along on the sourdough ride. All right, so basically I have these lames. I don't really use them. I think that's how you say it. I think it's lame. I use them if I'm making a loaf of bread. They're for scoring your bread so that when it rises, it allows the crust to expand and allows the bread to rise higher while it's baking. I have, of course, a bowl scraper here. This is the dish that I typically keep my dough in as it's rising. And I have the, what do they call these? Is it bannetons? I can't remember what they're called, but they're the wicker baskets that you rise your bread in for the final shaping. Okay, so this right here, this is my secret. I had sourdough starter that I had going for about, I would say a little more than 4 years, and I wanted to bring it with me to Mexico. So what I did is I spread it out a couple of times, took a few days and a few repeats in this process. But I spread it out onto some parchment paper, let it dry out 2 or 3 days until it was in flakes. And then I took those flakes and I put them in a food processor and ground them up. Now, to rehydrate them, I took I think it was a tablespoon and some water, and after it was all dissolved really, really good, I added a couple tablespoons of flour and I fed it. And I did that for 2 more days. I added some water and some flour to feed my starter. And so I only rehydrated a little bit, but this is just enough for me to make my muffins. I keep it in the refrigerator so I don't have to feed it as often. And when I'm ready to make it, I just pull it out and it sits at room temperature. And when it starts to rise a little bit, I'll give it a feeding. I'll let it rise, and then I'll start the whole process of making the dough.
Now it's time to take my starter that's warmed up to room temperature, stick it in this bowl, mix it up with just a little bit of water and a little bit of flour. Basically, I'm feeding it, and I want to get some activity before I actually make some English muffins with it. So, I mean, I can tell you right now, this smells like beer. And there it goes. So it's got a really good, nice scent to it as far as the sourness goes. I like a very sour sourdough. Now, sometimes if your sourdough is too sour, I believe it keeps it from maybe rising to its full potential as a bread. I don't care. I'm making English muffins. You can also actually, once you get your dough made for sourdough, and if you really want to get a little more of acidic flavor to it, you can stick it in the refrigerator overnight and let it proof or rise in the refrigerator. Now, how much water am I going to add to this? You know what? I don't even measure it. I just eyeball it. I figure maybe if a quarter of what I just added in starter is enough. So I added just about that much. And I'm just going to mix it up real good in here. Dump it in. Not getting too fancy here. I got this typical baby bag of flour. There's so little here. But you know what? 1 bag will do me about 2 times. About 2 times I can make my batch of muffins out of 1 bag. So, and I'll just throw it in there, mix it up, make sure that it's the right consistency. I want it to be, I don't know, kind of like a little thicker than pancake batter, I think. It's a good way to describe it. trying to do this on camera, so it's a little awkward. But anyway, mix it up. I don't care too much if it's got a few lumps in it. Look, I'm low maintenance here. It's no big thing. Like I said, I'm making English muffins. I'm not making some kind of artisanal loaf of bread. So if I was doing that, I probably would be a little more precise in my measurements and everything. I will be when I actually make the final dough for the muffins. But right now, just to give it a feeding, I'm not going to get crazy here. But typically I'll weigh it, and I'll weigh it out by the gram. Okay. So the consistency, it's thick, but it's not like a clump. It's thicker than pancake batter. It might be, maybe it's thicker than cake batter. Maybe like brownie batter thick. I guess could be a good description. And I scrape the sides down. If you are using a glass to proof in, or to do the feeding in, I should say, you can take a black Sharpie marker and draw a line on the outside of your container, and it'll wash right off. You're not going to hurt anything if you do that. Just kind of scrape the sides so you can see how high it has risen. You want to catch this when it's probably about halfway up. So it's going to double in size. I don't know. It's hard to tell in a container this small. Usually whenever you're proofing in something or doing a starter in something and you just fed it, about halfway up, a little more than halfway up, is you're reaching peak and it's time to use it. I'm just going to let this sit. Let me see if I can show you where it's at. It's about right here. It's not going to go up very high. Maybe, I don't know, maybe about to there. I know that doesn't say much, but you'll see. You'll see. This might take 2 or 3 hours, maybe. I'll come back and check it in a bit, and we'll see.
3 hours later.
Okay, well, it's been a little longer than what I said it was going to be, but and it did come up in size some. Now, it doesn't really look like it's doing it. There are some bubbles here. There are bubbles. If you were to put this in a mason jar, something a little more narrow and taller, you would have noticed the growth going up. But because I have it in a shallow dish like this, it's not as noticeable. So I do happen to have a scale and I have a recipe. So that is what I'm going to use now to actually form the dough for the English muffin. What I just did is I want to make the dough in here, and this little wee bit of starter left in here is not going to hurt anything because I like to use this lid. Oh, I noticed my lid's cracked. It's cracked, but that's okay. Anyway, so the recipe calls for 100 grams of starter. So I tear my scale and I just start adding. I can see little bubbles in here. Yeah, I just start adding my starter. 100 grams. You want 100 grams. And if you go just a hair over, that's okay. It's okay to go over. Just don't go over a ton. It's nice and thick. It smells very yeasty. A little bit of alcohol scent in there. That's a good fermented starter. A little bit more. A little bit more. Okay, yeah, it's 103. That's fine. What I'm going to do with the rest of this is I'm going to stick it back in this jar, okay? And then I'm going to add equal amounts of flour and water to that. So, got my 103. I'm just going to take that off there. Tear this, okay? And then put whatever's left here
in there. And we're essentially going to feed this itty bitty little amount of starter right here. I think that's all it's gonna do. And that's not really a lot, but that's okay. Probably it'll come out to about 20 almost. Or not, 15. Came out to 15. That's fine. 16. It's fine too. We're gonna put 16 grams of flour in there and 16 grams of water. And we'll let that sit out a little bit. Six, 10, 14, 16. Actually, it's 17, but that's okay. Oh, yeah, I gotta weigh it now. So we need 16 grams of water. So let's get something I can carry water with here. This will work. Okay, tear the scale. 9, 14. All right, hold on now. It says 15, but I got to drop on the scale. 17. I'll leave it at that. I'll take what I can get. Just mix this up and let it sit out just a little bit to start to ferment, and then I stick it in the fridge. And that's where it goes until I need the next batch. Okay, so I stuck a coffee cup on here because what I need now is 240 grams of milk. And I'm going to warm this milk in the microwave just a little bit, you know, warm milk, warmer than room temperature. And the recipe calls for 240. I'm going to use about 220. And the reason I'm saying this is because I am using Mexican flour, which is more finely milled, and it does behave a little bit differently. I have found that reducing some of the liquid makes it less sticky and less overhydrated. So that's about 221. I need a 240, 221. So I'm going to warm this in the microwave. I set it for 40 seconds on high. We'll see what that does. Okay, so back to the starter now. I need 20 grams of honey. So I'll tear that. I got me some honey. 20 grams. $16, $17, $18, $19, and $20. Okay. And we need 5 grams of salt. The recipe says fine sea salt, but you know what? Salt. So 5 grams of salt. Let's get it on the shaker side. I like that better. And you know, it's funny because 5 grams feels like a ton. It's like you're shaking, you're making snow caps on top of that honey. Peaks of snow. One more. There we go. 5 grams. Let's kind of finger test this like you're feeding the baby. Oh, that's good. It's warm. Pour that right in. Okay. We're going to stir that up real good. And then we'll get to the flour. Okay, so I've got it mixed up really well here. Now what we need to do is tear the scale. 360 grams of flour. That's usually about a cup or so. I'm just gonna start shaking. Start shaking and baking. I need 360. Yeah, it's probably more than a cup. Anyway, 2 cups? I don't know. Like I said, I've already made 1 batch. out of this bag of flour. I usually get about 2 batches out of these little itty bitty bags of flour. $3.44, $3.59, $3.60, and there's maybe a half cup left. All right, so we don't need the scale anymore. Just tear and turn it off. All right, so here we go. We're just gonna start mixing it up. It's going to be sticky. It's a high, what do they call that? A high hydration dough. Sourdough often tends to be a very high hydration dough. But I have found that sometimes when it's a little bit thicker, it rises better. I don't know. I guess maybe because it traps the gas more. Beats me. When I get it started, oh, I'm losing some of my flour. There we go, back in there, get back in there. Don't make me do another shake. There we go. Okay. And at this point, I'm just gonna stick my hands in it and just start doing some hand mixing. If I don't throw the flour out all over the place. And yeah, your hands are gonna get messy, just know it. You don't really have to do a whole lot of work with this dough. You really should, if you're making an actual sourdough loaf, you really should be doing some stretch and pull type kneading every, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes or something like that, a few times. And you should be doing some shaping, things like that. You don't have to do that with English muffins. Just have to make sure that it's mixed well. You can do a few stretch and pull type things as it sits. Just make sure it's mixed well. That's the thing. Because with this type of dough, this is not something you got to make sure it rises and everything for you really well in the bowl. No, it's going to rise in a pan. These aren't baked. These are made in a frying pan, essentially. And it is sticky. See what I mean? Sticky, sticky. Very sticky. I have a scraper here that I can use to get the sides down. I'm not real super worried about it right now. As it sits, as the gluten starts to react here, it will get less sticky. Right now, I just want to make sure I got it mixed well. Yeah. And I'm just kind of doing some rudimentary pull and stretch stuff here. That's it. And the more that you work it, the less sticky it will get. But it's still sticky, no matter what. It won't be as sticky later. And that's good enough. All right. Let's see if we can get some of this off my hand and back onto the bread, or the dough, I should say. This is the part I hate the most, because now I got to make my way over to the sink and touch everything to turn on the water and get some soap and good Lord, it's in my fingernails. Okay, I'm gonna punch it down a little bit, mostly just so you can see how much it's risen. There's no real reason other than that. I want to be able to see when I look in this bowl where I started and where it's gotten to there. Okay. Good. Put on a lid. You can see where it is. I'm not waiting for this to double in size. It's going to rise a little bit. You can take a Sharpie, because this is a glass bowl, and you can draw a line, and then you'll know where you started and where it's at. If it gets like, I don't know, 1/3 higher than that, I'm just going to come back after that at that point, and I'm going to do some more stretching, and then I'll leave it in there for a little bit longer, and then I'm going to roll it out with a rolling pin and cut it with a biscuit cutter.
The next morning.
Last night, I really didn't get a chance to do anything with the dough. So rather than let it rise and then miss the opportunity of having it at the right stage to cook, I stuck it in the fridge. And that's not a bad thing. It just slows the whole process down. And honestly, if you're looking for something that has a little more tanginess to it, more of that lactic acid flavor, as a sourdough, really sour type thing, the longer you let it ferment, basically, the more sour it will get. So if you happen to be making sourdough bread, that's a really good way to boost up that sour content, is to just let it rise overnight in the fridge. So right now, it's pretty high. It's almost to the top. But I'm letting it warm up to room temp. Before I stuck it in the fridge, I did do some stretch and pull on it a couple of times to get that real good gluten formation happening. But we'll come back to this once it warms up. Okay, so this is definitely risen. It's pretty high in the bowl. It's nice and soft. It smells good. I got me a really big pan, very large pan that we've got at Walmart before we came down to Mexico, and that's what I'm going to be cooking in. You can use cornmeal to keep your muffins from sticking. I don't particularly care for the cornmeal, so I would use rice flour. Right now I'm finding it hard to find rice flour, so I'm just going to use some flour, basically, because I have to roll this out with a rolling pin, and then I'm going to cut like biscuits. So we'll just throw a little bit of flour on the counter, and I'm probably going to have to do this a couple more times because this is a pretty wet, hydrated dough, and it is going to definitely soak up that flour. Rolling pin, and I've got a fairly large cookie cutter ring. This one's, I don't know, some kind of plastic, some kind of fake stuff. It's not metal. So where's my scraper? Okay, I'm gonna roll this on out. We'll get the scraper to help scrape it out. Now, when it comes to the temperature that I cook these at, the recipe that I had found years ago basically said low to medium heat, and they were never rising enough for me. So I've decided I put them on high and I let them go pretty much, and I keep a lid on it so the steam develops and helps them, they're rising and everything. Speaking of steam, I do put just a little wee bit of water, just a little into the pan. Okay. I roll these out, put them on high in that big pot, and just kind of let it. Ooh, it's making noises as I squeeze all the gas out of the bread that's risen. Kind of give it a stretch. Okay. Now, the more flour you introduce into this, the tougher it gets, and it has to sit for a little while. So I try not to put too much flour in it. Need some room here. I don't have as much room because the camera's in the way. How thick am I rolling it out? Well, I'm going to say a little more than a 1/4 inch thick. How many millimeters? How many centimeters? God, I don't have enough room. How many centimeters is that? 2 point some centimeters to an inch. I don't know. 1/2 centimeter? I don't know. I have to think about it. I just know 1/4 inch. So that's about right. Okay. So we're just going to start. Give it a good spin. Okay. And in the meantime, while I'm doing this, I'm going to turn this heat on and get this hot. So, lid on, heat on. And it is getting hot. And it's on high. I'm going to let it go on high. And as I cut these out, I'm just going to set them to the side. Okay. I might get about a dozen out of this. Sometimes, depending on how well I've rolled it out, it may be 11 or it may be 13, but it's usually in around that number. Can I get 2? Maybe. Maybe. Get 2 more. Ooh, yeah. Okay, that's got a little, looks like a little bite out of the side, but it'll be fine. So does this one. All right, now, when you introduce flour to a soft dough, you can't just immediately roll it back out again. You just let it sit for a little bit. I mean, I'll mix it, and then just let it sit for a little bit so it can, I don't know what the word is. I want to say acclimate, but that's not correct. But it's already thicker, like I can tear it apart. It doesn't stretch anymore. It's because I added all that extra flour rolling it out. So just kind of give it a good mix and just let it sit for a minute. Okay, so we got some steam hitting the top of this pot already. I'm literally just going to pick these up and drop them in on the edges. Once they start to rise, then I'm going to turn the heat down to like a low, medium, low. No, this one's going to be tiny. Oh well. Sometimes they're tiny. It's just because they kind of, you stretch them out and then they bounce back and shrink. Okay, I need more room. A little more room here. How about right here? Okay, lid goes on. Okay, and I let them, they're basically steaming what they're doing, but they're also getting the heat. That should activate the yeast and get them rising. Take a look at what it looks like inside. You can see all the moisture on the lid. Now remember, these were about 1/4 of an inch thick. If I've got this timing right, and sometimes I do miss, sometimes I'm too late, but if I've got this timing right, they should get a minimum of a 1/2 inch thick, maybe even thicker. So we'll come back to that, see how it's going. Okay, kind of getting a little more play in this, a little softer. It just always needs a little bit of time. You just can't immediately roll it back out again. Or it just shrinks. You roll it out and it shrinks right back. So, you know, I'm not a baking pro, but there's like some truth in this, whatever the reason is. I bet some sourdough or bread making guru out there can give us the reason for it. You know, there is a chemistry involved here. Science. And you sort of have to, maybe if I go slow, I don't know, I'm trying to roll it out and it's not really going very far. It just keeps wanting to pull back in. Well, we got some growth going on in there. Just looked. Oh yeah. Let's center this a little better. I don't want anything to burn. Okay. I should just like, you know, stretch it like a pizza. Pizza. I was never good at that. But it doesn't hurt to just kind of do that a little bit. Okay, let's do a quick look inside the pot so you can see what things are looking like. See how much they've grown? I don't know if you can really tell, but they have easily doubled in size. So at this point, I'm going to reduce the heat. Whoops, sorry about that. I'm going to reduce the heat to low and just let them slow flip or slow cook after that. I'm also going to get in there and flip them over. so they don't burn on one side. Look at that. Look at that. Can you see that good? Hoping. Anyway, I'm flipping them over. I'll put the lid back on and I'll let them finish. Okay. I guess I could bring the camera over and show you what I'm doing. Better see. I'm going to flip them over. Look how thick. Oh shoot, I just smushed that one. I mean, look how thick that is. Whoop. It's kind of hard to do this with one hand, guys. I hope you understand. Flipping it over. Okay. All right, we're going to throw the lid back on, and we're going to let that continue. As I continue to try to roll this out to a good thickness. I think this is good. I think this is it. And I might get three more out of this, and maybe I'll have a fourth one that I can roll together like a piece of Play-Doh. Okay, and maybe a little more. Okay. All right. So I got 3 more little ones. I got this ball of dough, which I may just shape this one. This will be like the red-headed stepchild of English muffins. It could be a giant one or a couple little ones. Might be good with some butter and some jam. I don't know. Or maybe some salmon and some cream cheese. It's definitely not going to be a pretty one. It's going to be the ugly one. It's just there's always at least one ugly one. And how many do I have here? I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, right? 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10. So I'm going to end up with 13. So number 13, the baker's dozen. Number 13 is the ugly stepchild. I'll try to roll it out a little bit. It's going to be a big one, though. I'm not going to try to make 2 little ones. Little ones aren't even worth the effort. Okay. It's pretty good. Still, it's just going to be an ugly one for sure. That's all right. Here we go. All right, so now let's go back here and take a look at what they're looking like. We got... These are done. That's a done one. And while I'm doing that, here's a side-by-side comparison, if you can see, of a shoot, maybe, when it's done, next to this little flat one right here, which is not even. So I'm going to throw that in. And I'm going to start taking the rest of these out. Okay. Throw another one in. There, take this one out. And this one. Now, if you're going to make it with the cornmeal, before you stick it in the pan, that is where you put a little cornmeal on each side. And it supposedly keeps it from sticking. But for me, personally, I find that cornmeal really just makes a mess. It just makes a mess. All right, putting it back in, letting these cook. Turn it back up to high to get that oomph. And let's look at this for a minute here. So side by side, here are 2 of them. They are pretty thick, as you can see, right? They may go down a little bit as they cool, but not much. You guys, that's my English muffins. And a note, unless you're going to go through them fairly quickly, you will probably want to freeze some. I found that, this is all natural. There is nothing artificial about these, and so therefore they tend to mold in about a week. So I'll put 6 of them in the fridge and I'll put 6 of them in the freezer. And I like to pre-cut them before I do that, but it's not a good idea to pre-cut them when they're still warm. And that goes with bread out of the oven as well. When they're still warm, they're still cooking on the inside. And when you cut them while they're still warm, they might get doughy. They may not continue to bake all the way. They may become deflated. Let them cool. Let them get cool, then cut them. Then freeze them and or refrigerate them, or however you wish to do that. I'm the only one that eats them, so I can't hold on to 12 of them for much longer than a week, and then I have to throw them away. So that's why I either refrigerate or freeze each little batch, so I can keep them longer. Okay, see, we got some rising going on in here. They are rising. I'm going to turn the heat down to low, and just sort of let them continue their journey. When these are cool, I'm going to cut them and show you what they look like on the inside. I'm going to hit the big ugly redheaded stepchild first. I don't have a bread knife. It would be good if you did. And I'm not doing spork flit. I'm not doing fork split. I'm just going to use this big knife right here. Just get an edge cut going. This one is, you can tell this one's denser. It had more flour in it. It was the large one. Yeah, and it's not really quite, see, this is what I mean about it being doughy in the middle. It's doughy, a little bit. When they're not quite done. Let's see, I'll try using a steak knife and see if that helps. I'll try it with that. And here's one of the other ones that had a lot of time to cool. Okay, there we go. You can see all the nooks and crannies. Looks pretty darn good. And I'm just going to cut these, and I will freeze a few, refrigerate a few, and now I have got English muffins for my breakfast sandwiches for about 2 more weeks, roughly. Okay, another one. Nooks and crannies, pretty good. This was out of the second batch where the dough got tougher when I cooked it with the other one. And you can tell it didn't rise as much, and it is a little denser, but okay. It is a little denser. It's doughier in the middle. It's not horrible. Toast it and it'll be just fine. But you can tell, first batch is always the best. So I try to get as many as I can in the pan on that first batch. Okay. Yeah, nice fluffy, nooks and crannies. Awesome. Oh guys, look, check it out. Butter and strawberry preserves. Oh boy, oh boy. Oh yeah. And I can smell the sour dough. I can smell the sourness. It's got that distinctive yeasty, almost beer-like scent. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, I'm so excited. Okay, here we go. I could have toasted it just a little bit longer, but wow. Flavor's there, man. That was so good. Makes me want to have a cup of coffee.
And there you have it. That is my sourdough English muffin process. Now, I have made full loaves of sourdough bread in the past. I just don't have a need to do so yet here in Mexico. And if you do make loaves of bread, you really do need to find yourself a high protein flour. I mean, typically a bread flour. It will specifically say that it is bread flour. You can also use rye and other types of grain. In fact, rye or even wheat make a really good feed for your starter, especially the rye. Starter just loves it. But you don't have to use it to make the actual dough. The dough, though, does need to be a bread flour if you're going to make a loaf of bread. It just will work better for you
It'll rise better. It'll have a stronger, crispier crust. And I have made in the past just straight sourdough bread. I have done variations such as Parmesan cheese, pepperoni and cheese, cheddar jalapeno. I've done fruit and nut. I've done seeded. And while I say all this, I'm throwing photos of the different types of breads that I've made in the past on the screen. I used to make several loaves, and then I would use a meat slicer or a deli slicer to slice the bread down, and then I would vacuum pack it and freeze it, and then just pull it out whenever I wanted some bread. It's just that, it is a process, and I just figured, you know what, I'm going to batch this, and then I'll have bread for several months, and then I'll do it again. My starter was kept in a mason jar, and when I would feed it, I would put a rubber band around the starting point so that I could observe how high it had risen in the jar. You can see from this one picture how very active it would get. Then, as I explained, I took my starter and I spread it out on parchment paper and let it dry out so that I could grind it up and keep it with me and bring it to Mexico. It seems like it really took off right around the time COVID hit, that everybody wanted to make sourdough bread. But I assure you, I had been making it an entire year before COVID at least. And it was fun. It took a while for me to get a really strong, healthy starter. It does take a little bit of time. And you got to play around with it. You got to figure out if it's not rising enough, why. If it's not, I had a hard time for a while getting the loaves of bread to actually rise for me instead of flattening out in the oven. They would bake, they would get bigger, but they would spread out. They wouldn't hold their shape in the oven. And I think the thing is my dough was just hydrated too much. I needed a heavier, more denser dough, and that really did resolve the issue. I want to share with you that the recipe that I use for my sourdough bread in particular comes directly from Patrick Ryan. He is a baker at Firehouse Bakery in Ireland. I love the way he says it. It's sourdough. It's not sourdough, it's sourdough. And he is on the I Love Cooking Ireland channel. They have a series with him, or several series with him, and it's basically his sourdough masterclass series. And that's free for you to watch. It's very informational. That is the base recipe that I use. Other people that I do watch on YouTube, my second favorite is Suni. Suni is Food Geek, the Food Geek. And then the last one is The Bread Code. So I'm going to put links to all three of those below if you're interested in following up on that and to get some great tips on how to make sourdough in general. It will be Patrick Ryan, I Love Cooking Ireland, Suni at The Food Geek, and The Bread Code. If you have not already subscribed, please consider doing so. And that way you'll get notified when we drop new videos. If you found this interesting, this was kind of a one-off sort of thing. This is not typically the type of video we put out there. But if you're interested in more videos about how to move to Mexico or our lives in Mexico, there are a couple of things showing up over here. Please feel free to click on one of those, and we'll see you with the next drop.